Hi, Maya. So great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. I'm super excited. Um, like I said before we went live, I don't know how I happened upon the website, but I was Googling chronic illness related organizations, um, just to see, what was out there and kind of get some resources. And I found your website, the Epic Foundation, and I was just amazed because I was like, wow, this is the total package. They're bringing awareness, they provide resources, um, and everything. It just kind of like leaped out at me like, wow, there's other people in this fight who are doing a excellent job at it. So I would like to know about the person behind the organization. How did your story of becoming Epic begin?
Thank you so much for asking. I love telling my story, but the reason why I love telling my story is because I believe there's power in the voice and there's power in our stories. And oftentimes, people with chronic illness walk around with internalized shame and guilt for something that they have absolutely no control over. And
Mm,
oftentimes it silences us for quite some time. So when we're ready to tell our story, it's so impactful. So, first of all, I want to say thank you for asking. So I'm Karen. I became Dr. Karen in 2005 when I earned my doctorate in clinical psychology. Thank you. So that's my background. I'm a clinical psychologist, but I have other parts of my identity that are so important to me, and I just want to share that with you. I'm a mother of two. I've got two daughters, and my oldest daughter just went to college. Woo woo. She's been in college for 2 months. That's my baby, Courtney. And my baby Madison is 11 years old. She just started sixth grade. So that's middle school out by where I live. So she's a middle schooler finally. And, or officially, I should say, not finally, because my baby grew up way too fast, both of them. And, and next Wednesday, or this coming Wednesday, the 20th, I will be celebrating 20 years of marriage. So I've been married to my husband Craig for 20 years. So those are,
Congratulations.
thank you. Thank you. Those are very important parts of my identity that I wanted to share with the world. So all of those pieces make me who I am. So I'm Mom Karen at home, Dr. Karen out there in those streets, and some people even know me as Doc Karen because that's my YouTube personality is Doc Karen. So but um, I think one of the things that I'm proudest of is being a chronic illness warrior. The reason why we're called warriors, in my opinion, is because, we always ready to fight um, on the battlefield. Um, it's not always easy, and there are many, 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 many difficult aspects of it. But I mean, I am so proud of the chronic illness warrior community. Um, but I digress. Um, like I said, I earned my doctorate in 2005. At that time, I was married and I had my first daughter, who was a toddler. And a couple years later, I started experiencing like very strange symptoms. But over the next several years, um, my symptoms became, more invasive and, symptoms that more so impacted my life than before. And I continue to try to live my life. I'm still married, taking care of my baby, and I was in private practice. I was in academics and teaching graduate school and doing, a lot of things. And these symptoms just kept, increasing. And the most prominent symptom was weight gain that was out of my control. It seemed like no matter what I did or did not do, the standard diet and exercise is the lecture that I frequently got from everyone, from loved ones to medical doctors. And I ultimately put on 150 pounds in less than 2 years. But along with that was, an onset of several symptoms, including an onset of diabetes, high cholesterol, hypertension, a heart murmur, GI symptoms. I mean, everything. Like my body was literally crashing, and I had no idea why. No idea. And I sought a lot of doctors. I mean, I started to fight for help because it was really starting to become impactful,
Mhm.
and even to the point to where it was affecting. I wouldn't say it was affecting my work. I would say it was affecting my job. So just
Mhm.
physically getting around, the fact that like I just could barely get through the day, all manner of things. And here my husband was watching me, you know, um, basically like feel trapped in the alien body, and I can't explain to him why, because the doctors were telling me, oh, you're probably stressed out, you need to go, you need to do more. I even had a physician tell me, oh, you're running on the treadmill, you need to run faster, that will solve your problem. I'm like, I doubt that you went to medical school to tell me to increase the speed on the treadmill, and then that's going to eliminate all my problems and these random issues that I was having. I mean, even random infections and hospitalizations and the whole thing. This went on for a long time, several years, and it got really bad. It got really, really bad. And one day, I saw an episode of Mystery Diagnosis. Like, I don't know if that comes on anymore, but probably a rerun somewhere. But it was a very famous show on the Discovery Channel, featuring rare diseases and sort of like the steps that people took to get their answers. At
Mm.
the time, I was miraculously pregnant with my now 11-year-old daughter. And I say miraculously because I'll tell you about that in a second. But it was scientifically it was said to me it was scientifically impossible for me to be pregnant at that
Wow.
time. And so I'm sitting here, I'm pregnant, having had a horrific pregnancy. My OB/GYN had no idea why. Um, and I see this show, and the woman who was featured on the show, who I know now, her name is Charmin McGraw. She's talking about this process and getting diagnosed, and literally was like, "Oh my goodness, that's my diagnosis." I knew right then and there
Wow.
that's what it was. And so when I brought it up to my OB/GYN, she said to me, I'll never forget this. She took my hand and she looked at me and she goes, Karen, why don't we wait to have a healthy baby and then we'll revisit this? I just want you to focus on getting this baby out safely. And I was like, what? And so I ran back home and, of course, went to Google and I researched pregnancy with this illness, and I quickly closed the laptop because I was very frightened
Mm.
about the information that I saw. And then I knew why she seemed so terrified to visit it at that time. But I had my healthy baby. I had my baby, and she had some issues in the beginning, and that she was in the NICU for a few days, but all was well. I had a healthy baby. Now I had two, children at home, and I was just ready to fight. And the name of this illness is Cushing's disease. And I went to the endocrinologist who had misdiagnosed me for many years. And I said, this is what I have. And he said, it's too rare. There's no way you have it because you have two healthy babies at home. He went down the line. He even told me that my stretch marks were not purple enough, because purple stretch marks are a prominent symptom of Cushing's. But, I presented with some atypical symptoms, but it made me furious that there were medical doctors who did not think outside the box and who did not understand that, you know, I was crying and screaming actually for help. And so the story goes, I fired him. Oh, as a doctor.
Good.
I'm in the Chicagoland area, but ultimately I ended up traveling to Seattle, Washington, where
Wow.
there was an institution, a facility called the Seattle Pituitary Center, and they were a high volume center that specialized in treating people with Cushing's disease and my symptoms. And my symptoms were caused by excess cortisol in the body, as it turns out, the stress hormone, your fight or flight hormone. And we
Mm.
all need it to survive, but if you have an excess of it, it will kill you. And in my case, it was caused by a pituitary tumor located at the base of the brain. So I ultimately had to have brain surgery in order to remove this tumor. But it doesn't end there. I had a really crazy recovery, followed by the disease coming back, followed by me having to have another surgery where I had my adrenal glands removed. And I'll revisit that later. But ultimately, I now live with adrenal insufficiency, which ironically is on the other end of the spectrum. So instead of producing too much cortisol, my body doesn't produce cortisol at all. And because you need cortisol to live, I have to take artificial cortisol, basically through medical steroids, in order to stay alive. I've been near death so many times I can't even remember how many times. And I've had to fight. I had a time where I was completely bedridden and I could not even take myself to the bathroom. I had to be carried to the bathroom. Followed by needing a walker and a cane, a lot of rehabilitation, a lot of things. But to wrap up this very long story, what I found was, even though, a lot of us fight and, we armor ourselves with medical knowledge, many of us were not addressing the psychological journey of living with chronic illness. We're not talking about the real stuff that impacts us, the impact on families, the impact on marriages, our finances, self-esteem, confidence. I mean, all that we just not talking about. And I told my husband one day, and at first he looked at me like I was crazy, because I was like, you know what? I don't think I should go back to private practice, because I had to leave private practice for a few years and just could not work at all. I was just, my only job was just trying to survive and be present for my family as much as possible. But I said, I don't think I want to go back just yet or anytime soon. I want to start a nonprofit. And that's where I became Epic, because I founded in November 2016, Empowering People with Invisible Chronic Illness. And we're known as the Epic Foundation. And our tagline is Together We Are Epic. And so I was like, you know what? Together we need to bring a voice to our community. Together we need to, talk about these things that impact us. And together we need to encourage each other to not only survive, but to thrive.
Woo. All right. That was a beautiful, I know that was just a summary of what you went through. So you wrapped that up really nicely. Wow. One thing, well, several things stood out to me, but I'm over here trying not to get emotional, because even though we have different experiences in the area of chronic illness, the common thing that rings true is like the psychological, emotional ramifications. And I talk about it on here a lot. I have chronic migraine disorder in addition to hypermobility spectrum disorder. And I'm visually impaired due to my condition of albinism. And it wasn't until maybe the last couple years that I really started to notice, like, something like, I know my body is out of whack, but mentally and emotionally, I didn't realize it was impacting me the way that it started to impact me. And the more that I just begin to kind of lean into that and just acknowledge it, it's been so freeing. Of course, there's a long way to go, because with chronic illness, it's like a roller coaster. You just gotta take it and ride the wave. But I think it's encouraging to me, especially knowing your degree is in that area, that you are also familiar with the impacts of that. And given your story, like I can see how there are so many instances where those components of, the mental aspect and the emotional aspect can really play a part in it. Could you talk about how um, your experiences have kind of given you insight into the importance of acknowledging the lows of chronic illness?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. So that is so important to address because, one thing that I know is that sometimes we feel this pressure to appear whatever strong is defined as,
Mhm.
even to ourselves, because it's like you fight so hard to get to the top that when you feel low, you're like, it's scary.
Mhm.
And we tend to run away from instead of leaning into. And I
Mm.
like the way that you talk about that because, oftentimes when I work with my clients, even with chronic illness, I talk about acknowledging, which is a word that you use, and leaning into what your experience is, whether it's high or low.
Mhm.
And there are a lot of lows because I got to tell you, I'm like, just even in terms of identity, self
Whew.
identity. I mean, come on, look, just and even if like you take one aspect, if you have a good job, it's incredible how many people's identities weigh so heavily on their work alone. And that's just how our society is built. But you take away that job, the prestige of the job, the income, going from a two income household to a one income household, whew, that was a journey.
Wow.
That was a journey. But on our website, it was important to me that, like, even with the website served as a vehicle by which people could feel connected and feel validated. And so, there were a lot of articles that I felt like, and a lot of information I felt like I needed to put out there, including chronic illness and trauma, how traumatizing it is, chronic illness and the 5 stages of loss, because you most definitely go through the loss experience with chronic illness.
Yes.
Chronic illness and your relationship and how it impacts relationships, including the people who walk away and
Yes.
go through all of that. So there are many, many things that we experience as chronic illness warriors that feel defeating, deflating, depressing, anxiety provoking. And I would love, and I appreciate this, you allowing me the opportunity to talk about these things, because I would love for our community to open up about these things even more and to know that strength comes from the liberation of opening up self and connecting to self. It is not about putting on a face, because while I appreciate people saying, "Oh, you're so strong for what you went through," I get that. But, I would like for us to acknowledge even the days where you feel like you can't get out of bed, you are still strong.
Amen. You were preaching, and I appreciate you sharing every bit of that because, like, um, so I was in therapy prior to, well, I've had one chronic illness my entire life, and then the other one for 8 years. But um, so I was already unpacking childhood related trauma in therapy. Then the symptomology of each illness start progressing. So now there's this whole other
Yeah.
a world that I have to unpack. And for a while in the beginning stages, I felt like, man, like I thought like I was handling this good. And I've learned that chronic illness has a way of kind of exposing those things that we probably haven't dealt with that aren't even chronic illness related. Like my
Right.
level of impatience, like I always knew I was a bit impatient with myself. A
Mm-hmm.
bit is an understatement. Oh, but chronic illness exposed that completely. I always knew I had extremely high expectations for myself, exposed completely. So, um, for me, therapy has been such a key part of even just me being able to talk about my chronic illnesses or my disabilities, because, I don't think we were ever supposed to go through things like disability and illness alone in the first place, and so many of us do. And so for me, therapy has been that modicum of release and unpacking and providing me with tools.
I love that. I love that.
Mhm.
And thank you for sharing that too, because let me tell you, therapy is a great thing. It's a great tool, and it's a great way for us to unpack, all that stuff. I'm gonna call it stuff because it's. And I even have a TikTok about this. I say, if you ever go to a therapist who's never been in therapy, run. And I say that in a funny way, but I really mean that because I really do believe in, the power of just having that person to help walk you through
Mhm.
that journey. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I think, it kind of goes back to something you said. Like, I think a lot of people, we feel the expectations of those around us. So sometimes, we may feel like, okay, well, I gotta appear strong in this moment so that people don't bother me or so that I just don't have no issues right now. And then we go home and we pay for it. Uh,
Yeah,
uh,
yes.
and so I think one thing that has been helpful for me, I'm going to ask you about this, is leaning into, okay, their responses, the way they perceive me talking about my illness on a regular basis or trying to communicate, their responses to that is not my responsibility. Could you talk
Mhm.
about how, just learning that even communicating about your illness, because that could be difficult for a lot of people. I know I can think of several folks that I know that it's still difficult. Could you talk about how just even opening up about that or communicating at the bare minimum can be helpful despite how people feel about it?
Yeah, thank you for that question because it's so important to talk about. It is a hard thing to say that what other people think of me is none of my business.
Mhm.
And that is one of my favorite quotes. Lisa Nichols says it a lot, motivational speaker out there. Um, and I still work through it because I really believe that learning is a lifelong journey. So I mean, everyone is always a work in progress. So you may have arrived somewhere and then you have a certain trigger and it just brings you back and then you keep working through it. That being said, to me, again, I say that there's power in your voice and there's power in your story. So certainly what I believe or I've come to believe is that telling the truth and nothing but the truth about what you're experiencing is so cathartic, it's therapeutic, and it's necessary. But like, what do you do, like you said, when there are people around you who perceive you a certain way? That's difficult too because number one, you probably will have had somebody in your life walk away from you because they can't deal and their whatever they're dealing with and their internalized, whether it's embarrassment or discomfort or inability to deal with anything negative, whatever their issue is that they want to project onto you, they finally give into it. They can't deal with it and they walk away. That's hurtful. But then
Mhm.
you also have people in your life who, they just judge you, especially if you're an influencer or you're out there, you're speaking publicly. As you know, Maya, there's a lot of opinionated people. And the thing is, what I learned is sometimes you just can't win. Okay, like with my illnesses, I technically live with um at least 11 chronic illnesses from the list of chronic illnesses that are listed on my website.
Wow.
And, it's like when you start sharing about that, people start paying attention. You will have people who get upset if you seem like you're doing too well. They'll be like, wait a minute, I thought something was wrong with you. How were you able to attend that wedding? And it's like, okay. And then you have people who get upset if you post a bad day. And they're like, I'm sick and tired of hearing about how sick you are. So you have like both ends of the spectrum and in between. And what I learned is you cannot please everyone, even if you try. Now, you talk about unpacking childhood wounds. I'm a recovering codependent, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Codependency, that's what I call myself. Codependency, what I tell people is when you take on other people's stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That's what codependency is. When you start internalizing the feelings, thoughts, reactions of other people around you. And I was tired of being a codependent. I was tired of, internalizing and soaking in the reactions of everybody around me, because you cannot make everyone happy. And, to wrap things up, what I learned is, to wrap things up about that question, what I learned is that, speak your truth no matter what the reaction is. That's what I encourage everyone out there to do. Because, I was silent for so long, even in the midst of my illness, where I was near death's door by the time I got help. I was too afraid to even question the doctors. I was too afraid to even, say, wait a minute, this is not just because I'm not dieting right or I'm not exercising enough. Something is wrong with me.
Mm-hmm.
And I was silenced for too long. And no, I will be silent no more. And the very last thing I'll say about that is what you'll learn too is that some people cannot handle your story for whatever reason. And, I remember hearing through the grapevine that, there were people who were like, Karen just needs to stop. We're just tired of hearing her story. We're just tired of hearing her talk about it. And at first I was really, really, really hurt. But you know what? What I realized is that your story must be really powerful if people talking about it. If people are talking about it, what power do you have in that story?
Ooh. You keep dropping nugget after nugget, bar after bar. And I think what you said is really important. Like it must carry a lot of weight for it to still be in people's mouths and in their mind, taking up space, rent free. Yeah. So along those same lines, shameless plug here for the audience. I have a single dropping October 22nd. It's called Through It All. And it's dropping the Friday, the week of Invisible Disabilities Week, because I am doing some things. I'm working on something. I'm not going to say everything, but the song is for Invisible Disabilities Week to kind of highlight my experiences with chronic illness and my invisible disabilities and how they've impacted me. And the song is not gonna be like, oh, let's party Friday, it's a song that talks about the lows of chronic illness. However, it is wrapped up in the consolation of my faith in Christ. So if you're interested, be on the lookout for that. I am also dropping a music video that same day. So be on the lookout for that.
I can't wait.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So after that brief commercial, uh, we were discussing just like the heavy impacts of chronic illness. And one thing that I've learned, and I was talking to someone about this, is like there's a major connection between just what we would call typical loss or typical stages of grief and the grief and the loss you experience with chronic illness. And I began to notice, I think it was a bit earlier this year, I was just chilling in my dorm. I just graduated from college earlier this spring. And I was,
Congratulations.
thank you, thank you. And I was chilling in my dorm and, you know, God talks to me and I was sitting there minding my business and he was like, yeah, you didn't grieve who you were because you're still trying to be who you were. You're still trying to catch up to the level of ability you had. And I need you to let that go. And I was like, ouch. Because uh, I had no clue that's what I was striving towards. But then I began to sit down and think and look at it like I am still trying to make up to overcompensate in this area. And it's running me ragged. So so I had to begin the process of like, okay, what about this is so um that I miss so much that I'm still hanging on to because the past me is not the person I am now. I'm emotionally stronger. I have more knowledge. My faith is strong. Everything else is better emotionally, spiritually, and all of that. But what is it about the physical thing that makes me mourn Egypt? And so I was wondering if you could talk about just the importance of learning to live just as you are instead of just as you were.
Yeah, thank you for that because I think that's one of the most powerful parts of our journey is accepting the grief and allowing for grief of the former self.
Hmm.
And that's going to really sting for a lot of people to even hear that phrasing former self.
Hmm.
Because many of us, like you said, strive to get back to that place. And, it's interesting because when I was, like I said, putting together a website and wanting to put information out there, I came across this really powerful article that talks about chronic illness versus normal illness.
Hmm.
And normal illness is basically when you have this expected pattern that leads to a stereotypical recovery
Mm.
and return to self. So, like, let's talk about like a broken leg, right? You break the leg, then you have the investigation, you have the x-rays and all of that leads to a diagnosis, and the doctor said, okay, well, you've broken the leg, and then you have this expected course of treatment. So they say, okay, we're going to put a cast on it, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and you're going to be walking with a walker, or you're going to be walking with crutches or whatever it is. Not a walker, of course, not with a broken leg, but with the crutches, you know what I'm saying. And then you sit there and you watch it heal, but you know that it's going to get to a certain place, and then you're like, okay, you go back to a state of a return state of self where for the most part you expect that you're going to be walking again.
Mm.
Chronic illness is so different because in actuality you don't really ever get back to baseline. Well, let me just be real, you don't get back to baseline. That's hard to say and it's hard to accept.
You're not even as you said it, I'm just like, oh. And I
It's
know.
hard, right? It hits you right. I mean, and I tell people like, okay, sit with that. That's what I would, because like even like in the work that I do, you know, even with like anxiety and things like that, or feelings of sadness, and people would be like, okay, help me feel better, and I'll be like, I just, what I want you to do is I want you to allow yourself to sit with it.
Mm.
You're like, Dr. Karen, I am never coming back. And they come back. They come back and they realize, you know, sometime later that, wow, what a powerful thing. Because oftentimes you've had the experience again where people have silenced you and they've made you put on a face and they've said, you can't sit with that. Let's move on. It's a whatever. We're gonna sweep it under the rug. It's a secret. Don't tell anybody else. Just put on a face. No, sit with it. Allow yourself to grieve. Allow yourself to feel that. So I digress. I went off on a tangent there, but with chronic illness, there's a fluctuating pattern. It's literally up and downhill if you were to put it on a graph. So there is not that typical return to baseline. So what you're dealing with is the literal ups and downs in life. And so for certain, you're going to deal with the loss experience and you're going to deal with the 5 stages of loss. And there was a woman who wrote a book, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and she wrote a book called On Death and Dying. And it was on the 5 stages, the famous 5 stages that we know today that include denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And what's so powerful about those stages is that it's not a linear process, so you don't have to experience one stage after another. And you can go from stage to stage back. So you might have reached a point of acceptance, and then one day you wake up and you're angry all over again. And that's just how it works, So I want people to understand that. And you can experience multiple stages at the same time. So, and I have known people, I've experienced all the stages. I've experienced denial. I've been very angry about it. The bargaining that comes with it is real. What if I did this? Did I do something, God? Like, if I correct this, can I get healed? Can I go back to my original state where I was? So, and acceptance. Also, I want to point out about acceptance. Acceptance is not saying that you're okay with what's happening. Like, oh, I'm happy that I have this chronic illness. Acceptance is being in a state of accepting what is. So I just want to point that out too.
Man, you pointed out dropping bar after bar after bar. And you kind of confirmed something because, like you said, you can experience multiple stages at the same time, but you can also bounce in between, back and forth, zigzag between stages. And I'm glad you mentioned that because that's something I've had to kind of learn to process. And I think for someone like me who has always been, let's go, 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 do. When you introduce chronic illness or the progression of chronic illness, and you have to be still, essentially, you have a lot of time to bounce back and forth and in between. And I think it's so important that we get that message out because I know I myself have experienced chronic illness guilt for even going through or going back to a certain stage. And I know people, and I've talked to people, even in terms of disability, invisible disability, just how you can feel guilt or shame for not being over something. And something that chronic illness has taught me is there's this notion of arrival that society has taught us, which I think is a fallacy. I don't think we arrive until we in the ground because we're not through growing. We're never through growing. We're not through learning. Like I graduated college earlier this year and I've been learning ever since. I don't intend to stop learning. And the same is true of chronic illness. I was telling this to my therapist the other day. I said, the thing that is difficult sometimes is externally, the people around you, they're like, well, hope you feel better. I hope you do this, try this. Let me pray for you in this way, giving you all these remedies and suggestions. And a lot of it comes from a place of uncomfortability,
Yeah.
because in society, we highlight people who are normal, and we even highlight people who are like on a whole nother level of just achievement and movement and activity. And we forget that that's not everybody's story, and we shouldn't hold everybody to that standard, because we all have highs and lows. And I think one of the things I told her was, I said, I know it's hard for the people like family and friends watching me go through this, but how much harder do you think it is for the person who's actually going through it?
That's
And I painted this picture. It's like I just graduated from college, but now even more so than ever. Every year I'm being enrolled in school again. Every moment I'm enrolled in a different kind of school again, because
yeah.
things change from moment to moment with chronic illness, and you have to be flexible. And I've never been so flexible in my life, and I am hypermobile.
Yeah. Oh, that's so true. That's so true. Wow, everything that you're saying is resonating with me as well. So I love this conversation. That is so true.
Love
The guilt that you speak to is so real,
hmm
because, like you said, we in our society we honor people who seem high achieving and to seem who seem to um, move past something
hmm
like that overcomer narrative. But really, thriving is, you know, moving forward despite adversity. That is what thriving is. But it doesn't mean going back to former self. And it doesn't mean getting to a certain space that people expect us to get to. Because you
mm
can be laid up in the bed for weeks and still thriving. Because look, you're laid up in the bed and you said, I'm gonna get through today. I'm gonna get through today. And then you get to tomorrow. I'm working on getting through today. And then the next day. And then before you know it, you will have gotten through all those days. But you're
mm
in the bed and somebody on the outside might look at you as that's not thriving. Oh, yes, it is. Yes,
mm
it is. And
Preach.
that's why in our mission statement, we say that we empower chronic illness patients or warriors and their loved ones to thrive, and to empower someone means to make someone stronger in claiming their rights. And so we want to make people stronger to claim their rights to thrive despite adversity. And that just it's a beautiful thing. So you know there's nothing to feel guilty about. That being said, I understand the guilt, the internalized shame and guilt that we face when we feel like we've reached a point of acceptance, and then you're vacillating, you're going back to another stage, and you're like, and then people are looking at you like, wait a minute, I thought, you gave your testimony the other day and you said that you were all good. Now you just seem like, what's wrong with you? You just, if you just prayed a little harder, you had a bit more faith, then
That phrase just
then and look, what that is they're bargaining for you. Because when you talked about the uncomfortability,
hmm
that resonated with me. That is a projection onto you because someone is uncomfortable with what's going on with you.
Whew, that is a word. That is a message right there. And I think, um I hope, with the usage of social media and the internet in a positive way, in a
Yeah.
constructive way, we can slowly and begin to see like more people with chronic illnesses have these conversations. Because I know it's hard. I mean, I'm talking, but like, praise God for the Holy Ghost because He gives me the strength to communicate these things. But like, it's not easy, but I think it's necessary. And it's the mission of this podcast, putting faces to chronic illness, putting faces to invisible disability, putting faces to medical conditions, because uh, when you get down to it, like, there are medical professionals who don't know how to talk to their own patients. They don't know how to guide them through the diagnosis process. I remember after I got first diagnosed with chronic migraine disorder back in 2015, nobody told me that there was multiple types of migraine. I had to research that. Nobody told me that I could experience multiple in a day. Nobody told me that there was a high possibility that I would have major side effects of medication. Then nobody told me none of this. And I think if I had had medical professionals who were able to do that, it would have been so beneficial. But I often find that because they do not know, a lot of medical professionals gaslight. Um, and in the initial telling of your story, I noticed several instances of what we would call medical gaslighting. And I know gaslighting is like a hot button term, but it is a legitimate thing. I would like for you to kind of define what medical gaslighting is and what does it look like and some ways that you navigated it in your experience.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Maya, because you're bringing up such powerful, themes that exist in the chronic illness community that we just simply do not talk about enough. So I really appreciate this opportunity to talk about it.
Thank
But
you.
let's talk about the medical gaslighting. Whew, it's real. It's real. And it's simply put, when medical doctors make you question your own reality about your illness. And, they make you question, your knowledge, your reality, your experience. And I have had that experience for every stage of the process. Like I said, I was misdiagnosed for almost 5 years, almost died by the time that I was effectively treated.
Mm,
But the man who misdiagnosed me, who used to practice out of Chicago, and he eventually moved his practice to Indiana. And ultimately, I believe it's because he had so many horrible reviews on the
mm,
internet, it turns out. But it was it was so important for him to be right, because he
mm,
didn't want to admit that my symptoms were because of my diagnosis, to the point where I had literal evidence of my diagnosis, positive labs, positive imaging, the whole thing, went through brain surgery, the whole nine. And it was to the point where if I went to my local hospital, if I had a hospitalization, so I'll give a specific instance. I had a hospitalization uh, right after, like a few weeks, like about 3 weeks after my second surgery, where I bruised my adrenal glands. And I had a medical crisis that led me to an ER visit that led me to a hospitalization. Well, the doctor who misdiagnosed me, he was on the team that did the consultation in the hospital that I was hospitalized at. And
mm,
they didn't have any other doctors. It was just this team of these three doctors. And he happened to be the doctor that was on call during that time. And so he had to come up and see me. I couldn't stand to look in his face because I was so angry. Just so I harbored talk about the stages of loss. I harbored a lot of anger towards several doctors that I saw during the time that of my misdiagnosis. As I was laid up in the hospital, almost had another a crisis, which was another near death experience.
mm,
And this doctor comes and he sees me and he starts the gaslighting. Well, why did you have this surgery? This surgery is rarely done. I don't know who told you to have this surgery. And I'm like, Oh, just a well-renowned institution in Seattle. Just, just those folks there, but nobody really that important, I guess, But he's like, I don't know who told you to have the surgery. He just started, and of course, the hospital staff, they're deferring to his expertise because he's the consultant. So now he's got the whole team questioning my whole journey, essentially. And by that time, I had been through a lot. I had been through brain surgery. I had been through having vital organs removed. Your adrenal glands control a lot of stuff. Your blood pressure, your ability to, do certain things. So, your testosterone levels and things like that. But here this doctor was saying, like, first of all, why did you have this surgery? It's just unheard of, which was not true. And then I'll never forget this. The second thing he said to me was, wow, you're so much fatter than you were the last time I saw you. Now, it took me the longest time to figure out, why would he say that to me other than he's a jerk? But why would he say that to me? And what my conclusion was, other than we live in a fat phobic society and the fat shaming is real, but aside from all of that, it was his way of saying to himself, still, you got bigger not because of this diagnosis that makes people gain weight, but because of you.
Ooh.
And he was still trying to make me internalize self-blame for something I had absolutely no control over, because he could not deal with the idea that he messed up. And so that's just one out of many stories. I had been told by doctors well after surgery, like, oh, maybe you really didn't have this illness. I mean, it's just crazy, crazy stuff. And what I learned was that sometimes when doctors are uncomfortable, just like we talk about the people in our lives who are uncomfortable, because they don't have the knowledge that they think they should have, they project, and they make you the person who's to blame for your own illness.
That's deep. That is deep. And it's sad, but true. I've had several experiences, and I think, and there's like different iterations of medical gaslighting. The one I've experienced the most is this, well, I hear you said this medication didn't work, but let's try it again. Or like, fam, I think I know my body. And so like just experiences like that. And I think, I've always held the medical field in high regard, especially like my degree, the thing that I wanted to do was get my PhD in physical therapy and do all that. But the thing I had to learn is, like, with chronic illness, it's the other way around. It's almost like we have to become the experts of our condition, the needs that we have, and how we need to be accommodated, even when it comes to medical professionals. Funny story, my albinism is not a chronic illness, it's a medical condition, which causes me to have no pigment in my eyes, hair, and skin. And as a result, I'm visually impaired. So I'm African American, Black and proud, but I just don't have any pigment. And so I've been to this eye doctor since high school, I believe. And my recent visit, he's like literally asking me questions about albinism. And I'm sitting here like part of me is like, wow, he's genuinely interested. The other part of me is like, this is sad. He did not learn this. He's an eye doctor, and he did not learn this eye-related condition. He did not learn it in school. And so I'm having to educate a medical professional. And I just remember sitting there like, you have two options, Maya. You can be like irritated, because it's not the first time I've had to do that. Or you can just take it as a moment where you got to educate and advocate. And he's a really good doctor. I was just genuinely like surprised, like, I'm educating you.
Yeah.
I'm educating you. And that's not to say I was arrogant and again, he's a good doctor, but at the same time, it just felt flip-flop. So
Mhm.
I think with chronic illness, one thing I'm learning is that it's okay to be an expert, and it is okay to learn from medical professionals, but at the end of the day, you have to be your own best self advocate. And for people who watch my podcast, you know where I'm going with this, because every episode we talk about self advocacy. And in chronic illness with invisible disabilities is such a key skill to learn. You know, me being visually impaired on the spectrum of blindness, um, I have to do it every day. And then when I got introduced to migraine, I had to learn it all over again. And then when my hypermobility spectrum disorder got more progressive, I had to learn it, how to do it all over again. So I was wondering if you could kind of shed some light on how self advocacy has played a role in your life being a chronic illness warrior.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, being my own best self advocate is life changing, because you talk about the reverence that we have for doctors, and they go to school for a long time. They learn their craft and their skill, and there's so much respect for that. But I grew up, being taught that a doctor's word is always bond. So anything from a cold to whatever else, whatever the doctor says, that's what you believe.
Mm-hmm.
And so, when I was getting sick in my late 20s into my early 30s, and now I'm 43, it just, it was mind boggling, that experience of just being shaken up, where I thought, surely the doctor knows what they're talking about, because that's a medical doctor.
Mm-hmm.
And it just shook up my entire world. What I've come to learn, and I talk about this all the time, is that, like you said, we're the best experts of our own bodies, and we are the head of our own medical team.
Whew. Can you repeat that, please?
We're the head of our own medical team.
Whew.
I'm the chair,
Mm.
and I get to pick who's on my team.
Ooh.
And to sit in that power, it took a very long time, and sometimes I still have to work through it, but I have to remind myself of that all the time. And that's the biggest part of my self advocacy, is seeing myself in that light, because you almost don't want to put yourself in that higher place of importance. But guess what? We are that important.
Amen to that.
We are. So I remember a colleague of mine, a dear friend, wrote an article for our website called Turning the Tide. Um, and for her, she describes it as an awakening,
Mm.
where doctors would tell her, it's all in your head, it's not real, the medical gaslighting and all of that. And she finally said, you know what, it is in my head, in the way that you know I can say to myself that I'm the head of my own medical team. And that was like a rude awakening for me as well. And so now that's how I operate my medical journey. Like, if you're not on board, now I don't mind different opinions, because sometimes we have to explore things, and I don't claim to know everything.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, I want people on my team who are not rigid. They're
Mm.
open, they're flexible, like we have to be, and they're willing to defer to the expertise of someone else if they don't know everything. If they have to ask me questions, you like it, I love it. If they have to, call, like I have a local endocrinologist on my team who will call other experts, in other areas, who will call, an expert at the Mayo Clinic, or who will call, who will defer to the expertise of my endocrinologist in Seattle, Washington. And this man has been practicing for over 50 years.
Whew, love
And he'll do it. He'll do it. And so I respect that, because he respects my need to be my best self advocate. Now, if there's a doctor, and I've had this experience, that comes on board and they're just like, I know everything, like, stop talking, I don't want to hear what you have to say, they're going to have to get off the ship, because I'm the captain of my own ship.
yes, give us a boot.
They gonna get the boot. I don't care how you get off that boat, but you have to get off.
Oh my goodness, I love that. The analogy that you use speaks to me for two reasons. One, I'm a former athlete, played basketball in middle school and high school, until my hypermobility disorder symptoms got too much to do all that. And also because my degree was in kinesiology. And one of the things that I learned, you learn is, as a physical therapist or whatever kinesiological clinician you decide to be, you're going to have to work with the coaches, you're going to have to work with the doctor. But you also learn the interesting relationship of how those dynamics work. Like, the doctor may have a certain opinion and may want to uh, tell a clinician, "Hey, let's do more therapy." The coach may want the athlete to hurry it on up and get better, or halfway better, so they can make their money or perform. And the therapist is trying to bridge the gap, and then you have the sports psychologist trying to. So it's definitely a model that is relatable, because if those different team players don't work together, it can be to the detriment of the athlete. And in the same way, if the medical professionals and our support system, and even if we don't work to our benefit, it can be to our own detriment. And one of the things I'm learning is, it's okay to have that boldness to say, okay, hey, I've tried this before. I don't want to do that again. I'm not comfortable with this. And I think for me, the best medical experience that I had in my entire chronic illness history has been with my physical therapist. Not only do they defer when they don't know, they ask me questions. I feel heard. First time I've ever felt this heard in my chronic illness experience in terms of the medical process. And just being with them for the last 2.5 months has helped me see that, you know, you talked about this maybe like maybe 20 minutes ago or so, like trying not to harbor that resentment for all medical professionals. And I've really had to work on that, because I've had so many that just close their ears. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. And then give me the same prescription, or didn't give me a chance to share and overall what I shared. So much so that I really had to be intentional about saying, okay, that was them. I'm going to forgive them and let them go. They fired, but I'm going to forgive them and let them go.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
and harboring that for all medical professionals. And I think my physical therapists have really helped me with that. And so I mention all of that to say, to your point about the relationship, your medical team, your support team, what helps you in your process of your chronic illness journey in terms of working with other people? How does it? I guess what I want to know is what motivates you to work with them, even when it's uncomfortable and you've been burned by medical professionals or different team players before.
Yeah. Um, it's definitely a process, and it's an up and down process, right? So depending on where I'm at with the journey, it can look different ways at different times, but certainly, what motivates me is my vision.
Mm,
And I really believe, I heard one time that visualization is 100 times more powerful than willpower.
yeah.
And that's because if we can visualize what we want at the end of the day, that is one of the things that keeps us going. And so, you know, it's not necessarily a vision of going back to the former Karen, because that person does not exist. But it's a vision of where I want to go. And that vision does not entail perfection. Let me just say, because sometimes people are like, oh well, I'm afraid to have a vision because I'm going to be disappointed. And what you find out is they've held this standard of perfection. Again, they want to exceed a certain, standard, and if they don't get to that place, then it's like, oh well, I haven't done enough, and so now I'm disappointed.
Yeah.
And I'm able to sort of push through and forgive, and just forgive people, that even the people I push off my ship or tell to get off or whatever, because my visualization is all about just forward movement, whatever that looks like, and having people around me that support that, and who are always supportive of that, whatever that looks like. So I mean, there was a point where there was a physical therapist on my team, for instance, many years ago, and that physical therapist came to my home, and our only goal was to move my toe on my right foot.
Wow.
That was the goal. And you know what? Like, he didn't sit there and go, oh well, you're lazy, you need to, if we don't get up from here to the door, then you're not doing enough. No, that man, I remember him to this day, because he supported the vision, and the vision was to do more at that point than I was able to do before he came there. And so for me, moving that toe was like, he was my cheerleader. He was like, you got that toe moving. And guess what? I wish he was out there watching, but I wish he knew that several years later I would be doing hip hop dance with my daughter's hip hop class, thinking I was doing a little something, the whip and the nay-nay, when I thought I was feeling myself.
You understood the assignment.
I was doing the whip and the nay-nay. I was doing it. But I wish he could see that, because it all started with that vision. And had he said, you're not doing anything, he wouldn't have been a part of my team. But I constantly try to keep people on my team who support the vision.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. You said something about vision, and one of my favorite Paralympic athletes. He's totally blind, and he's a long jump athlete for Team USA. His name's Lex Gillette, and he has a quote that he says, it's world renowned, and there's no need for sight when you have a vision. And what you said is so true, because in school, of course, we learned one of the modalities of training or working with an athlete is visualization. And as I've studied it, I didn't even realize that's what I'd been doing my whole life as someone who's been visually impaired, ironically enough. So people would ask me, how do you play basketball? You have terrible vision. Look, grace of God, and I love the game. But it was really more than that. I would stand really close to the goal. I would look up a picture of a basketball goal, and I would picture it in my mind, so that when the furthest I got from the goal, I didn't have to see it. I was so focused on my form and being consistent in my form, and I had the image of the goal, and I would see me making it. So much so that even when I was having those moments of self-doubt, I was like, you know what, let's shake this off, and let's take care of business. And through that exercise that I didn't even know what I was doing for so long, it it helped me see that, you know, how we see ourselves in light of chronic illness can be a motivating factor or a dismotivating factor. And you said the way that your former physical therapist talked to you as he was treating you and helping you move your toe, that wasn't just something to overlook, because anybody can give you exercises or tell you how to move or strengthen something, but it's how they help you in that kind of brings about results. And so, as you said that, I kind of saw something else, like how we talk to ourselves in spite of illness uh, is important. So I would kind of like to know, what are your thoughts on the importance of how we speak to ourselves just as we are in our bodies that also have illness?
Yeah, that's so important. How we speak to ourselves, and you know how we see ourselves. It's vital to how we move in life. It really is. And despite the lows, I think just telling yourself, I got this. Even if it's, I often say, it's day by day, moment by moment, breath by breath. So even if it's one breath at a time, just being able to tell yourself, I got this, just one breath at a time, is so important. I often encourage people to do mirror work, and I try to do it myself. And I encourage people to do it at night.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason being that your subconscious kicks in, you know, pretty strongly at night, and that's why we dream when we dream during REM sleep. And so, even when I used to study in college and graduate school, I would like play tapes of the lectures, or when I was studying for my licensing exam, I got licensed as a clinical psychologist. I would just play the tapes of the workshops over and over again during my sleep, so it would seep into my subconscious. And I often will encourage people to do that with other things as well. So, like the mirror work would be, looking into the mirror and saying things to yourself. I am beautiful. I often tell my daughters, the sky isn't even the limit. Reach beyond the sky, or reach beyond the stars, because your possibilities are limitless. So to be able to say that to yourself in the mirror, and even like with the community that I come from of Cushing's disease warriors, who have literally morphed into another body, like physically your whole body changes. Oftentimes these warriors have low self-esteem, self-confidence issues. I mean, when your whole body changes, or as when you have like just such um significant changes in your physical self, um and people don't see the process you go through. They just sort of like see what they judge. Like for me, it's like, ooh, I've run into people who have overtly said, oh my goodness, you got so big, or whatever it is. The entitlement is just so real, but it sometimes will get to you. It will. You try to be as self-confident as possible, but it does have an impact. So definitely being able to look at yourself in the mirror and say, I am beautiful. Um, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me.
Preach, man.
Um, all of that, and just say that to yourself, and let it resonate while you sleep,
Mm-hmm.
is so very important. That self-talk is so very important. And the last thing I'll say about that is that I believe in having mantras, things that you tell yourself even throughout the day. And our family mantra is never give up. And I always tell my daughters, you know uh, falling is not failing. Falling is not failing. And when you fall, you get back up. Every great person that has made an achievement, it wasn't because they didn't fall. It was because they got back up despite falling. So, you know, that is a mantra that is a very strong one in our home, just to never give up. And so always carry a mantra with you that you can turn to.
Ooh, that was beautiful, and I'm gonna start doing that. So, I'm gonna start doing that. That's a great strategy. And as you were talking, I was like, oh man, this has been such an awesome conversation, and there's so many ways we could take the conversation. But I'm gonna ask you one final question before I ask you the better not bitter question, and that is, a couple weeks ago, I did a video on misconceptions revolving around chronic health conditions. Um, and I basically talked about 10, the one of them being like, if someone just rests, that should be enough, radical rest should be enough. Or the it's all in your head misconception, or the just pray harder misconception. And I talk about, because I believe in talking about ideas and solutions.
Mhm.
Um, if I just tell you like this is wrong and I don't give you any tools, then we just didn't nothing was gained. And
Yeah.
so in that video, I talk about where those myths most likely came from and how to kind of deal with those. And one of the things that I notice, it comes down to relational proximity.
Mhm.
And this is something that I talk about a lot, and that is the notion of relationship, or being in the presence of someone who has an illness or disability, goes farther than you recommending anything because you're not a
Mhm.
medical professional. It goes farther than you just throwing your hands on somebody in prayer for that moment and not serving them. it
Mhm.
it goes beyond, man, I hope you feel better, because whether people realize it or not, with chronic illness, that statement doesn't really fit as well
Mhm.
as would for a typical illness. So relational proximity says, okay, I don't know necessarily what your disability or illness entails, but I'm going to build a relationship with you because I want to get to know you. And through that connection, self disclosure will come, and you build that trust and you learn how to serve that person rather than judge or make assumptions regarding the person's needs. To that point, I would, appreciate if you could share with our viewers um, some ways that those who do not have a chronic illness can better serve or love or provide that relation of value for someone who has a chronic illness.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think it's probably one of the most important questions of today, of our conversation, because I believe that relationship is everything.
Yeah.
The relationship is everything. Like I grew up in a religious environment that focused on laws, legalism, like you have to do this and then you'll earn this. And
Hmm.
then when I found out that relationship, that changed my life. When I have relationship, that goes so much further than what I do.
Oh, it.
So relationship is everything. And even in my practice, um, I will often tell clients, well, I tell every client really, that I come from a background that ultimately has come to believe that my relationship with you is the most important part of the process. Because I can teach skills, I can go down this list of sort of concrete things, but if we
Hmm.
don't have trust and we don't have a relationship, then it's for naught. It doesn't even matter.
Mm.
And that's the same thing with chronic illness warriors. I think that we crave relationship.
Oh, yeah.
We crave relationship because oftentimes, like we've talked about several times in this conversation, we've lost some relationships. And can you still hear me, Maya?
Could you repeat the last thing you said for a
I
second?
said that, chronic illness warriors, oftentimes we've lost some relationships. And so that's one of the things that we're seeking is, when you talk about relational rather proximity, we're seeking relationship. That's the most important thing. So I would say to people who support chronic illness warriors, focus on relationship. And part of that isn't fixing the problem,
Whew,
because I'm not broken. I don't need to be fixed.
that part.
Okay. What really I want you to do is ask me what I need. Just ask. There's so many different things, but asking is such a vital part of building the trust in the relationship. Just ask me. And it might be different on a different day. But if you just simply ask without assuming, without trying to fix, then if that trust is built and that relationship is built, I will tell you. And I think every chronic illness warrior would want their loved ones to know that.
Yeah, that is so good. That is so good. Wow, this has been probably one of my favorite conversations ever.
Mine too.
Um, and we've covered so many things, and I've asked you a lot, picked your brain a lot. But the final question I ask all my guests is my favorite question,
Okay.
and that is, what or who has helped you to become better and not better?
Wow. That is an amazing question. I love that. Okay. So I know this is going to sound cliche, but I just talked about relationship, and I think my relationship with God
I hear you.
has helped me to become better, not bitter, because I think about grace, which is unmerited favor, and I think about how in all the times that I have messed up, I have been shown grace.
Mm,
And grace is also there's two definitions of grace. It's unmerited favor, and then it's God's ability in our inability.
oh, can you run that back real quick?
It's God's ability in our inability.
Whew, you preaching. You are preaching, ma'am.
When I think about that, so not only the unmerited favor and thinking about how I can demonstrate that towards others because he demonstrates that towards me, but if I feel like in my own strength, because I'm weak, I can't do it, his ability will help me to do it.
Amen. 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 Thank you for sharing that. And one last to that point that you just shared. In the New Testament, when Paul is asking God to remove his thorn, he asked him several times. He's like, "Can you remove this thorn?" He's like, "My grace is sufficient." But a lot of times, people talk about the fact that God's grace is sufficient. They don't talk about what God does instead of taking away the thorn, and that is He gives us strength. And so, throughout this conversation, I have heard through your experiences the strength that He has given you, the strength that you exhibit to be a wife, a mother, a clinician in your field, and serving others. And that has encouraged me to recognize the strength that He gives me on a regular basis. With that being said, I want to give you a chance to plug your website, your Instagram handles, where people can find you, and all those wonderful things.
Thank you so much. So we're Epic Together, and our website is www.epictogether.org. not .com, because some people get that mixed up. It is .org. So epictogether.org is our website. Please check it out. Like I said, we have a lot of articles and things that we want to bless you with, to just really just soak in some of the knowledge, and also to validate your experience. And on our handle is Epic Together on all of our platforms. So we are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. You can find us Epic Together. Our logo looks like a flame with two hands holding it. Some people think it looks like a lotus flower, but it's very colorful. And so if you see that flame with the two hands, that is what we are, Epic Together, because we believe that together we are epic.
That's awesome. And I have all her handles and stuff in the description, and the logo is actually on the thumbnail to help folks find it better. And without further ado, I want to thank everybody in the comment section and those who are watching on the replay. I appreciate you spending your time just listening and enjoying the conversation with us. I've had a great time, and I look forward to seeing you guys again. And don't forget about the single that is coming out next Friday. And that's all for the church announcements. Without further ado, live each day to become better and not bitter. And I will catch you next time.